Yo, what up guys? It's your boy Blender Dude back at it with the latest video and the hottest new game we got. It's Minecraft. We got Minecraft right here. We got Minecraft in C++ built in the Afterburner engine. And as you can see here, it works. And that's honestly all I could really ask for. Chunk generation works. We have block placing, block breaking. As you can see as I fly over the surface here, you can see the terrain actually generates right in front of you. And you can see the top layer is always grass, but if we dig down, you can actually see that there's dirt underneath all this grass. And if we continue digging, you can see that there is even stone underneath that. So that is one of the features here. Every single block has its own level of collision and its own entity within the memory of the computer. Basically, everything has two distinct states. It has a state where it is a block on the ground that you can actually see. And then there's also a state where it just exists within memory. Basically, just the ID of the block and the location of said block. And I actually gave the blocks some visibility through there. I gave a little hole through that, so you can actually see that only the top block is actually rendered. None of the other blocks are rendered, but the moment you break a block, then the blocks beneath it render. I actually broke two there, but you can see the blocks actually properly render. As you can see, if I break this block, there will be a new block that comes underneath it right there. And of course, this is not actually a new block. It is the block that exists in memory as is. It's just rather it's being rendered or not. Basically, if all the blocks were to be rendered, there would be millions of blocks, and there'd be no way that the computer could handle that at all. The frame rate would be tanking. And now you can see that one of the most complicated things I implemented for this solution was the block selecting feature, and this is after all the performance problems were dealt with. But you can see how as I move my cursor around, different blocks are highlighted, and actually there is a reach limit. So you can see I'm pointing at that stone block down there, but it's just not gonna be close enough. But you can see up here all these blocks are showing correctly. And the way I implemented this was actually a custom axis aligned bounding box system, because all of these boxes are axis aligned and bounding boxes of themselves. So basically I cut out a decent amount of the work that would be required to create that bounding box and just use that bounding box. So you can see that it goes there. And another thing I had to do was, if you have a ray that is pointing out through the camera, you know, looking at this plane here, obviously it's going through multiple blocks. So I also created a system to look at all the blocks that are currently visible, and you know, if the ray goes through this block, this block, this block, and this block, it'll only pick the closest block. So that's why it looks correct, and that's why I don't break multiple blocks at a time. But every time I hit R, it basically breaks blocks, and if I press and hold R, you're able to clear quite a good bit of area. Now the other thing I have implemented is you can place blocks. So I can right click here and place a block there and there and there, and of course you might just not want to place the grass blocks. You might also want to place dirt blocks. So if you click dirt here, you can now place dirt on the surface, or even stone. I can place stone here and there and basically wherever I want. But yeah, you can see chunk generation is in fact infinite. So you know, the further I keep going out, the longer it will, the more it will generate. And I didn't actually end up implementing serialization to the disk because that turned out to be way more complicated than I expected. So everything's in memory, but I optimized the memory footprint of this so well that it should never be using more than about a gigabyte of memory, even at maximum distance. The other thing I had to implement was chunks. So you can't see them here, but there are chunk boundaries, and you can kind of get an idea for them as I float outwards. Those are chunks loading in. They're smaller than the Minecraft chunks at around, I believe, 8 blocks in the XY direction, but still the full 256 in the Z direction, because performance along the Z direction is not particularly complicated. The chunks, you can basically grab any block within the chunk. I realized that the way I calculate the visibility of the blocks upon first generation is I take a block, and obviously if the block is the topmost block of that column, you know, that vertical Z column, obviously that will be rendered because there will be air above it. And then if there is, basically it looks at all the columns next to it. So actually, if we can find a good example of it, sometimes there's a block that's too high, but if there's a block in the scenario like this, you can see that basically there is the there's a block where the top column is shown. So obviously that top block is always shown. And then down here, obviously there's the dirt down here. And then there's 2 blocks that need to be visible. So it actually takes the maximum and the minimum of the columns next to it and and that tells it exactly what blocks need to be shown. So you can see, because there's a block here, that's that minimum on that column. So it looks at the 4 columns next to it. Because this is the minimum of that column, this block will be shown, this block will be shown, and if there were to be a block above it, that block would be shown as well. But of course, that might be the top block, so that would be occurring anyway. But yeah, I believe that is all the features of this game I'd like to go over. It was a very fun game to implement. It taught me a lot about memory management. One of the things that was very complicated to implement was my first naive approach was to generate everything as a world object and have all the block data implemented into it. But that took up nearly 30 gigabytes of memory. So I realized I had to have 2 states for the block, one for the visible blocks and one for the invisible blocks. Those blocks that are not visible by the camera but still do exist. I learned a lot about just C++ in general. I had to do some algorithms, unordered sets, unordered maps to keep track of the different chunks and the different blocks within those chunks, in the visible blocks as well. For every single frame, I check what blocks are visible. The visible blocks are generated when the chunk is generated, and only when a block is updated are the 6 adjacent blocks to it updated as well. That basically updates an unordered set that keeps track of everything within everything that's visible within the chunk. And the whole world also has a visible blocks unordered set, which takes into consideration the player's location and what chunks are around the player. So you can see, as I fly this way, the blocks behind me, if I fly upwards here, it's really easy to see. You can see the blocks behind me are actually getting unrendered, or they're just being deleted from the world object. And as I go down here, you can see that these blocks are now getting rendered in front of me. So basically, the world might not have... The world's visible blocks is dependent on the player's location, so that was something I had to take into consideration there. But overall, I'm really happy with this project, and I am super happy to see how it came out. Daniel Jakes and Marcelo Morales asked for a special shout out in this video, so for them, if you could like, comment, and subscribe, that would be very much appreciated.